Unit 14, Algae. Take a look at this slide and notice what we commonly refer to as kelp here, a type of seaweed. That is actually an algae. We'll take a closer look at many algae in the rest of this section. So what are the characteristics of algae? What makes algae algae? First of all, they're photosynthetic. They can make food from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. They have cell walls similar to other plants, but the cell walls are organized in various ways depending on the groups that the algae belong to. They do lack extensive tissue differentiation. That is, the tissues that make up their body are similar, whether it looks like a leaf or looks like a stem or looks like a root. The actual tissue is really similar. The other plants, such as trees and shrubs and even the common flowers we're used to, have dramatically different structures for roots, for stems, for leaves, for flowers. Algae lack that differentiation. The body of an algae is called a thallus, or plural thalli, and they can range from microscopic and unicellular to large multicellular organisms, as we saw in that very first slide with the kelp. Algae are classed into two kingdoms, and then there are several divisions, particularly in the second kingdom. The first is the eubacteria, and that includes the cyanobacteria, which are also called blue-green algae. And then the kingdom Protista contains the eukaryotic algae, or the algae that have true nuclei, and their DNA is contained in a nucleus. And that includes the Dinophyta, which are the dinoflagellates, Bacillariophyta, which are the diatoms, we'll take a closer look at later, Euglenophyta, which are the euglenoids, again we'll take a closer look at, and then the three more common types of algae, the Chlorophyta, which are the green algae, the Rhodophyta, which are the reds, and the Phytophyta, which are the brown algae. Algae have different forms in which they grow. We'll look at the common ones here. Unicellular algae as single cells. That means just each individual cell floating around separate from the other algae cells. And these can be non-modal, meaning they can't move on their own at all. Just a cell floating with the current, essentially. They can be amoebic, which means that the cell walls are flexible and they can flow in different directions, like an amoeba's sort of a swimming and crawling action. Or they can be flagellated, meaning they can have one or more tails that they can actually move and sort of swim around or move through the substrate that they're in. They can also be unicellular as colonies. And in this case, the individual cells are still individual organisms, but the cells group together to form a colony. The entire colony is not an individual organism, it's simply a colony. It's like when people live together in cities, each individual person is its own organism, but they form this big colony. Algae can form, the unicellular algae can form colonies. Pardon me. The colonies can be non-modal. Again, they have no ability to move on their own. They just kind of flow with the current. Or they can have flagella, each individual cell having one or more flagella, and then acting in concert can move the colony around. Algae can also take the form of filaments, which can be chains, long links like hair, branched filaments that divide into multiple individual strands, or unbranched, just long, stringy bits of algae. They can also take the form of a parenchymatous thalli, which means a multicellular, well, the filaments are multicellular, the parenchymatous thalli can be multicellular, and they can take the form of blades, sheets, or tubes and have a much more plant-like appearance. Now, as I said, they're usually classed in two separate kingdoms. The eubacteria includes the prokaryotic organisms, meaning the organisms that don't have a true nucleus to contain their DNA, and that's the cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. The protista are eukaryotes, and these organisms have true nuclei that contain their DNA. The protista contain the red, green, and brown algae, which are the common seaweeds, and other algae that we find in freshwater environments as well. Green algae are the ancestors of all green plants. We'll take a look here a little more closely at cyanobacteria. Again, traditionally called blue-green algae. They are microscopic, unicellular, or they can form filaments, and there are colonial forms. They're distributed around the world in oceans, freshwater, and even damp terrestrial habitats. And reproduction of cyanobacteria is by simple division, simple cell division, where a cell will divide by mitosis, forming two brand new cells. Each one can then grow to full size and divide again to form new cells, or by fragmentation, which occurs with the filaments in the colonial forms, where the filaments can be broken into pieces and then develop new cells from the broken ends, or the colonies can break apart and then fill in the missing part with individual cells to form two new colonies. The blue-green color in cyanobacteria comes from phycocyanin, and they contain heterocysts, which function in the fixation of nitrogen. They can actually use atmospheric or gaseous nitrogen, which, as we've seen, has been a characteristic of legumes. This slide shows the structure of a typical cyanobacteria cell, and if you look in this section, you can see the three layers of the cell wall: the cell membrane, the peptoglycan layer, and the outer membrane that form the cell wall. Outside of that, there's a mucoid sheath that creates mucus or slime, and then the entire structure, follow this line around here, forms something called the capsule, the entire thing. And then outside of the capsule, you can see this area here called the slime coat. The slime coat protects the capsule from the environment to an extent, and it's also a point where the colonial forms can attach their slime coats and actually join together to form the colonies. If you remember back in the section on plant structure and physiology, we mentioned there that it was thought that chloroplasts in plants evolved from cyanobacteria being enveloped by larger cells. And if you notice on the previous slide, the structure of a cyanobacteria is very, very similar to the structure of a chloroplast inside a plant cell. So that's why that belief that that chloroplasts evolved from cyanobacteria came about. The structure is so similar, and even the sizing. So it's possible that over time, cyanobacteria were enveloped by larger cells. The cyanobacteria provide a benefit to those larger cells because of that photosynthetic ability to make food from water and carbon dioxide. So the relationship became symbiotic, and at some point the chloroplasts lost the ability to live on their own. This next slide here shows some cyanobacteria. You can see these swirls and patterns in the water. Are the individual cells, but there are so many of them, and there are millions and billions in this photograph, that they're visible to the naked eye. Similar scenes to that can be found in almost any still water environment. Stagnant, still water that doesn't flow and isn't subject to a great amount of wave action. Cyanobacteria thrive in situations like that. And if the water is nutrient rich, polluted in some way, you often see huge numbers of cyanobacteria. Finally, for this little section, blue-green algae can group together, as we talked about before, in colonies, and the surrounding mucus can group them all and form visible ball-like groups when grown in culture. There's some speculation that these groups of blue-green algae could be the manna referred to in the Bible. Keep in mind that we're talking about microscopic individual cells grouping together in huge numbers to form a structure that's visible to the naked eye. Each one of these small ball-like structures can contain millions of individual cells. Next section, we'll take a look at the diatoms.